dust. That was the first thing that hit Elijah Hobbs's nose when he opened yet another cardboard box labeled Local Chronicles, 1850 to 1900, unsorted. Elijah was the keeper of history for the small town of Pine Ridge, nestled at the foot of the rugged Appalachian peaks, and his little library, combined with the Historical Society, was more his personal refuge than a frequently visited place. Today, on a raw October day with rain drumming on the shingled roof, he finally decided to tackle these neglected piles. Inside the box, among yellowed receipts and faded photographs of bearded men in stiff suits, lay a thin, leather-bound diary. The leather was cracked, the corners frayed, and the once gold embossing was almost worn away, leaving only vague outlines of the name Amos McGregor, 1878. Elijah carefully opened it. The pages were brittle, the ink faded to sepia. The handwriting was uneven, hurried, as if the author had written in a fever or in fear. Most entries concerned the hardships of farm life, the weather, and grain prices. But one entry, dated June month, 25th day, in the year of our Lord 1878, made Elijah put down his cooling coffee cup. The mist came down from Crow's Peak before noon, thick as sinner's milk. Jonas went to check the traps down by the Black Creek, but did not return by sunset. Sarah is crying, the children are frightened. Old Powhatan, the Indian who lives like a hermit by the river, shook his head and muttered about the mountain's evil spirit that hunts on this day. He said the moon tonight is bad, and under its gaze people lose their true form, and hunters of the past rise from graves to reclaim what they deem theirs. I told him to leave, called him a heathen, but my heart grows cold. The sound of bells, I hear it through the fog, as if someone is driving cattle where cattle have no place. Lord, save and keep us. The next entry was made a few days later, the handwriting even more broken. Jonas was never found. Only his hat by the creek, torn as if by claws. People whisper about a bear, but I know it was no bear. Powhatan said Crow's Peak demands its tribute, and that those who dare remain there on this night become prey, or something worse. Elijah put the diary down. Crow's Peak. That was the name of one of the highest and most inaccessible summits in the county. A fire lookout tower had been built there a few years ago. He recalled rumors about a ranger who had gone missing there a year or two back. An accident, they said. But now, reading these lines written over 100 years ago, Elijah felt a chill crawl down his spine that had nothing to do with the autumn weather. He rummaged through another box, pulling out a yellowed newspaper clipping from the Pine Ridge Herald, July 1923. The headline read, "Mysterious Disappearance of Lumberjack in Crow's Peak Area." The article mentioned that this was the third such disappearance in that area in the last 50 years, and all had occurred at the end of June. Local legends, the reporter wrote, attribute these incidents to old Indian curses, but authorities lean towards wild animal attacks or tragic accidents. Elijah sighed, closed the diary, and put it back in the box. Just coincidences. Old tall tales. But somewhere deep down, an unsettling feeling took root, that some doors are indeed better left unopened, and some legends are more than just fabrication. He looked out the window at the darkening silhouettes of the mountains, hidden by the veil of rain, and for a moment it seemed to him that Crow's Peak was looking back. My name is Jake Riley, and just a couple of months ago, I would have laughed in the face of anyone who told me I'd trade the roar of F-18 engines for the rustling of pines and the crackle of a radio. But after 12 years in the Marine Corps, 2 deployments that still made my teeth ache at night, and a subsequent not-so-successful attempt to fit into civilian life in a metropolis, silence became synonymous with paradise for me. So when a job as a ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park came up, I jumped at it with both hands. And being assigned to the Crow's Peak Fire Lookout, the most remote and isolated in the entire park, felt like hitting the jackpot. 60 feet of steel and wood cut into a rocky cliff with a view of millions of acres of virgin forest. Perfect. The road to the tower was more a direction than a road, a broken dirt track winding among giant oaks and maples crossed by streams every so often. My old Ford Ranger puffed and wheezed but climbed stubbornly upward. Finally, through the dense green it appeared, pointed like a medieval tower, a gray steel structure proudly rising above the sea of trees. At its base, Henderson, my direct supervisor, was waiting for me. An elderly, wiry man with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to reflect all the wisdom and weariness of these mountains. "Riley? Henderson?" He extended a calloused hand. The handshake was firm. "Welcome to Crow's Peak. The view from up here is something, all right, but work is work." He led me up to the small, glass-enclosed cabin. Inside it was Spartan, a desk, a chair, a cot, a small pot-belly stove, a radio station, and of course the alidade, an instrument for pinpointing the azimuth of smoke. Henderson quickly briefed me. Scan the horizon, report any smoke, check in on the radio twice a day, conserve supplies brought in every 2 weeks, all standard, until he got to the last point. "And one more thing, Riley," he said, lowering his voice and looking past me at the endless forest expanse. "June 25th. On that day, no matter what, you must leave the tower before sunset. Come down, get in your truck, and drive to base. No questions. You'll spend the night there and come back the morning of the 26th. Understand?" I blinked in surprise. "June 25th? Sir, what's the reason? Some kind of equipment check, or—" Henderson shook his head, his gaze even more distant. "Tradition. Bad luck, if you like. The old-timers say this place on that day, it's restless. Just do as you're told, son. Some doors are better left unopened." He paused, then added, as if reluctantly, "The ranger who was on this tower before you? Davis. He disappeared last year, right around those dates. The official story was an accident, fell off the cliff, but they never found the body. This put me on alert. Disappeared? And you think it's connected to the bad luck?" "I don't think anything, Riley," Henderson cut in, steel in his voice. "I'm just giving you an instruction. Follow it and you'll be fine." He patted my shoulder, a bit too hard, and without another word started to descend. His evasiveness only piqued my curiosity. Left alone, I started exploring the cabin. In the corner, under the cot, I found an old, battered journal. The cover was scratched, some pages torn out. It was the logbook of previous watchmen. I flipped through it. The entries were mostly routine. Weather clear, visibility 20 miles. Smoke spotted, azimuth 270, reported to base, thunderstorm last night. But some entries, apparently belonging to Davis, were different. They became shorter, the handwriting more uneven. June 18th, that ringing again. Like someone is herding a cow on the slope. But there haven't been pastures here in 100 years. June 20th. The fog is strange today, thick as cotton and shadows moving in it. Or am I imagining things? June 22nd. Henderson called, reminded me about the 25th. Said it's important. I feel like an idiot, but something's not right here. This peak, it feels like it's watching. The last entry was dated June 24th morning. Didn't sleep last night. The ringing was very close, and some smell, damp earth, and something else. Can't place it. Need to get out of here tomorrow, even if it's just my imagination acting up. The pages after that were blank. I closed the journal, feeling a chill run down my spine. The ex-Marine in me said this was all nonsense, a trick of the imagination in isolation. But something in Henderson's tone, in these fragmented entries of Davis, made me nervous. June 25th. What was so special about that day? I looked at the calendar. It was a little over a week away. The morning of June 25th turned out surprisingly beautiful. The sun flooded the valley with golden light. The treetops were veiled in a light mist, and the air was fresh and clean. I woke at dawn, made myself coffee on the small gas stove, and stepped out onto the observation platform wrapping around the cabin. The world stretched out below me like a giant green map, and nothing hinted at trouble. The rational part of me, hardened by years of service where decisions were based on facts, not superstition, said, "Jake, this is just a job. Come down like Henderson told you, and don't invent things." But another part, the one that always sought adventure, the one that made me a pilot and then a ranger, whispered, "What if Henderson is just messing with the rookie? Or it's some silly local tradition with no basis? What if Davis just ran off, tired of this wilderness?" I hesitated. An order is an order. But this order was strange, illogical, and curiosity, that ancient human curse, gnawed at me from within. I looked at my watch, 7 in the morning. Still plenty of time until sunset. Okay, I decided. I'll stay here until noon. If nothing happens, I'll pack up and go to base. I just want to be sure this is all nonsense. I convinced myself it was a reasonable compromise. The first half of the day was deceptively quiet. I walked around the platform several times, scanning the horizon carefully with binoculars. No smoke, no suspicious lights. Birds were singing, a squirrel darted along the branches of a nearby pine, begging for treats. I even started whistling an old tune, feeling the tension gradually ease. Well, there you go, I thought. Just a normal day. Henderson, you old worrywart. I checked the radio connection to base was clear. Everything was perfectly normal. The change began after 2 o'clock in the afternoon. First, I noticed the birds fell silent, abruptly, as if on command. Then the sky to the west, until then flawlessly blue, began to darken, covered by leaden clouds that moved with unnatural speed. And immediately, fog descended upon the forest. Not the usual morning mist that slowly rises from the valleys, but a dense, thick fog like milk that poured out of the ravines, like a living entity, devouring trees, rocks, and then the tower itself. Within minutes, visibility dropped to a few feet. I could barely make out the railings of the observation deck. The air became humid and heavy, and there was a smell, strange, unfamiliar, a mix of decaying leaves, damp earth, and something else, something subtly ancient, sickly sweet and putrid, as if an old grave had been opened nearby. I felt uneasy. I tried to contact base. The radio responded only with a loud, irritating hiss cutting through static. The connection was lost. I stood, listening intently to the silence, now broken only by the sound of my own rapid breathing. And then I heard it. A faint but distinct ringing of bells. Not church bells announcing glad tidings, but small metallic bells, like those hung around the necks of cows or sheep. But the melody, if it could be called a melody, was somehow fractured, dissonant, with wailing, mournful notes. And the sound seemed to come from everywhere at once and was approaching. My heart pounded in my chest. I grabbed my binoculars, but they were useless in this milky haze. I wiped the fogged-up windows of the cabin, peering down to where the mountain slope should be. The fog swirled, writhed as if alive. And in those swirling masses, at the very edge of visibility, I began to make out dark, indistinct silhouettes. They moved slowly, uncertainly, but there were many of them. Too many for casual hikers or lost animals. They were moving with purpose. Towards the tower. The ringing of bells grew louder, more insistent. Other sounds joined it, the crackling of branches, the shuffling of many feet on a rocky path, and something resembling a discordant, murmuring chatter. I couldn't make out the words, but the intonations were ominous. My hand instinctively reached for the heavy hunting knife on my belt, the only weapon I had. What the hell is going on here? Flashed through my mind. Curiosity vanished without a trace, giving way to a bone-chilling premonition of something horrible. Davis's entries, the ringing, shadows in the fog. This wasn't imagination. This was real. The fog briefly wavered, as if an unseen hand had parted its dense veil, and what I saw below made my blood run cold. It was a crowd. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of people slowly climbing the slope towards the base of the tower. But these weren't modern tourists. Their clothes, my God. They were dressed in rough homespun shirts, deerskin trousers, and baggy dresses, the kind probably worn by the first settlers of these lands a couple of centuries ago. Some were barefoot, others wore something resembling homemade moccasins or crude boots. In their hands they clutched, not hiking poles but pitchforks with long, rusty prongs, axes with massive blades, makeshift spears with crudely sharpened tips, and smoking torches, casting flickering orange reflections on the swirling fog. Their faces. I couldn't see them clearly through the veil of fog and distance, but even from here, I could see they were contorted by some primal rage and fear? Yes, it was fear mixed with the determination of fanatics. They moved in silence except for that ominous ringing of bells, which now seemed like a funeral march. I recoiled from the window, my heart hammering like crazy. This couldn't be happening. Some kind of prank? Too elaborate. A cult? But where would they come from in such a remote place? And those clothes? My brain desperately searched for a rational explanation, but found none. One of them, a tall man with long matted hair and a scraggly beard, dressed in rags, raised his head and looked directly at the tower. Right at me. I don't know how he saw me through the fog, but he did. He raised a hand clutching a rusty cleaver and let out a wild, guttural cry that echoed across the slope. "Beast! Beast in the tower! He's there!" And the whole crowd, as if on command, roared in response. The roar was inhuman, full of hatred and some horrific ancient hunger. They quickened their pace, their torches flickering faster, approaching the base of the tower. Panic seized me. Talk to them? About what? These people looked like they'd stepped straight out of a nightmare. The only thought was to run. But where? I was 60 feet up, with only a single metal ladder leading down. Gotta go down, I thought frantically. Maybe I can slip past them into the forest. I have a chance if they don't expect me to come down right into them. It was a desperate plan, but there was no other. I grabbed my backpack with a small supply of food and water, checked the knife on my belt, and lunged for the hatch leading to the ladder. The descent seemed like an eternity. The metal steps were cold and slippery with moisture. The wind howled through the tower supports, mixing with the furious cries of the crowd below. "Monster from Crow's Peak! Get him! Kill the beast!" came up to me. They had already surrounded the base of the tower. When I was about 10 feet from the ground, I jumped, landing awkwardly on a twisted ankle. Pain shot up my leg, but adrenaline muffled it. I scrambled to my feet, looking around. The crowd was everywhere. They had spotted me. With a new, even more ferocious roar, they lunged towards me. Their eyes burned with mad fire in the torchlight. I saw a glint of metal. Someone swung an axe. I barely dodged it, feeling the wind from the blade pass an inch from my face. Without thinking, I bolted in the only direction not blocked by a solid wall of people, straight into the forest, into thickets of rhododendron and thorny bushes. Branches whipped at my face, roots snagged at my feet, but I paid no attention. Behind me, I heard the crackling of breaking branches, the heavy breathing, and the furious shouts of my pursuers. They were surprisingly fast and agile for people in such strange clothing. And they knew this forest, every twist and turn, every ravine. The ringing of their cursed bells pursued me, echoing off the trees, creating a chilling, panic-inducing atmosphere. It felt like it wasn't outside anymore, but right inside my head. My lungs burned, my ankle throbbed with pain, but I ran like I had never run in my life. Running from something that defied all common sense. Running to survive. The forest around me grew thicker, darker. The sun, if it was still there behind the dense fog, didn't penetrate here. I stumbled, fell, got up, and ran again, driven by the shouts and the ominous ringing that seemed to be getting closer. My ankle was on fire, each step a torment, but I forced myself to move. I no longer knew the path, just surged forward, trying to shake off the chase. Branches clawed at my face and hands. My clothes were turning to rags. Suddenly the trees parted and I burst into a small clearing in the middle of which I couldn't believe my eyes. A village. A small village, lost in the wilderness, that wasn't and couldn't be on any map of this national park. The houses were crude, built of rough-hewn logs, the gaps chinked with moss and clay. The roofs were thatched with straw or shingles blackened by time and dampness. Thin smoke curled from several crooked chimneys, mixing with the fog and spreading a pungent smell of burnt wood, manure, and something else, subtly disturbing, acrid, the smell of fear and old poverty. Overturned carts stood by dilapidated fences. Some rusty agricultural tools lay scattered. No people, no animals were visible. Only this eerie, unnatural silence, broken by my own ragged breathing. I froze for a moment, trying to figure out where I was. This place looked like time had stopped here a couple of centuries ago. But there was no time for thought. From behind the trees, from three sides, my pursuers appeared. They formed a semicircle, cutting off my retreat into the forest. Their faces were even more savage, their eyes burning with an evil fire. They advanced slowly, tightening the circle. I was trapped. Behind me was the wall of one of the houses, to my left and right. Narrow passages between the buildings, but they were already blocked. I pressed my back against the cold, damp logs, holding my knife out in front of me. "Come on, you freaks," I croaked, though I knew I had no chance against such a crowd. They approached, their murmuring growing louder, turning into an ominous chorus. "There he is, the beast! Get him! Don't let him escape!" The closest one to me, a burly fellow with a pitchfork, was already raising his weapon. I prepared to sell my life dearly, and at that very moment when I could feel the icy breath of death on my neck, the door of the house I was pressed against burst open inwards. A strong, bony hand grabbed the collar of my jacket and with incredible force yanked me inside, into the darkness. I didn't even have time to cry out. The door slammed shut with a dull thud, cutting me off from the roaring crowd. I fell onto the dirt floor, trying to catch my breath. A musty smell of dust, decay, and unwashed bodies hit my nostrils. When my eyes adjusted slightly to the gloom that filled the single room of this miserable structure, I saw my rescuer. It was a man, though at first glance it was hard to determine his age. He was terribly emaciated, skin stretched taut over his prominent cheekbones, His eyes gleamed feverishly in the darkness. His long, matted hair and beard were tangled, his clothes reduced to rags barely covering his thin body. In his hand he gripped something like a makeshift spear, a sharpened stick with a piece of metal tied to it. He was breathing heavily, listening to the sounds from outside. Furious shouts and pounding on the door reached us. "Davis?" I whispered, recognizing him from the photo I'd seen at the ranger office, the missing ranger. He slowly turned his head to me. For a moment, surprise flickered in his eyes, mixed with some deep, old sorrow. You're the new one on the tower." His voice was hoarse, cracked, as if he hadn't used it in a long time. I nodded, still struggling to recover from the ordeal. "Jake Riley, what's happening here? Who are these people?" Davis smiled bitterly, revealing blackened teeth. "Welcome to hell, Riley, or to be precise, to the cursed village. And these people, they are our jailers and hunters." He listened. The pounding on the door grew stronger. "We need to get out of here, fast. They'll break the door down soon." "Jailers? Hunters? Davis, I don't understand anything." I jumped to my feet, ignoring the flare of pain in my ankle. "What is this place? Is it some crazy cult?" Davis shook his head, his gaze full of despair. "If only it were that simple, Riley. This isn't quite our world, or not quite our time." He spoke quickly, breathless, as the roar outside and the sound of the door being broken down intensified. "Every year on June 25th, when the fog comes, this area, it kind of sinks. A temporal anomaly, a pocket of reality, a curse, call it what you will. This village and its inhabitants, they are ghosts of the past, or cursed souls, doomed to eternally relive the same day, hunting the monster." "Monster," I repeated, feeling a chill run down my spine again. "Yes," Davis nodded, his eyes feverishly gleaming. "Us, those who find themselves here on this day. You see, if we don't get out of this zone, by midnight we'll be trapped here. For a whole year, until the next June 25th. And gradually, we'll turn into those very monsters they see. I got caught like this last year. Thought it was just Henderson's tall tales. Decided to stay, just like you did, probably." The door groaned with renewed force, one of the planks snapping off. I saw mad eyes gleaming in the gap. "We need to go! Through the back wall, there's a breach there!" Davis shouted, pointing to a dark corner of the hut. We rushed towards it. Davis pushed aside some rags, and I saw a hole in the log wall large enough to squeeze through. As he was pushing his way out, I felt a strange, tormenting itch all over my body. My skin burned. My bones in my arms and legs began to ache as if they were being twisted. I hissed in pain. What's happening to me?" I croaked, as we emerged outside into a narrow, rubbish-strewn passage between two houses. Davis looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw something akin to pity. "It's starting," he whispered. "The curse. It's already working on you." I didn't understand what he meant, but then my gaze fell on a large, dirt-covered rain barrel standing by the wall. On its dark, still surface, like in a murky mirror, was reflected something. A distorted, fanged face with eyes burning with yellow fire. My ears, they were pointed, elongated upwards. The skin on my cheekbones and hands seemed to have darkened and toughened, and the nails on my hands were lengthening, turning into claws. I recoiled in horror, not believing my eyes. "No, that's not me." Davis sighed heavily. "Yes, Riley, that's you. That's how they see us, and the longer we're here, the more we match their expectations. The curse is changing us, not just outwardly. It awakens something ancient within. He held out his hand. Beneath the layer of dirt and scrapes, I clearly saw that his fingers were also unnaturally long, with thick yellowish claws. "Werewolves," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "We're turning into werewolves?" "Or something like it." Davis nodded. "To them, we are just the beast. A monster that must be destroyed. The same thing every year. They hunt, we run, or we fight." He looked at me searchingly. "And if we don't get out of here by midnight, this form will become permanent. Until next year. And the mind, it will also begin to fade, giving way to instinct." I looked at my hands. The itching intensified, turning into a burning sensation. I felt my muscles swelling with some unaccustomed, wild strength. The pain in my bones became almost unbearable, but through it broke something else. Rage. A primal, animalistic rage. Memories of service, combat missions, fear, and adrenaline. All that was nothing compared to what I felt now. This was something deeper, more instinctive. From the street came a furious roar. They realized we had escaped the hut. The ringing of bells was approaching. "They're coming for us," Davis said, tightening his grip on his spear. "There are only two ways out. Either we break through, or we become their trophies." His voice was calm, almost resigned. But in his eyes, I saw a spark. Maybe my arrival, fresh blood in this eternal hunt, gave him a flicker of hope. Or just another comrade in misfortune with whom it wasn't so scary to face the end. The horror of realizing what I was becoming mixed with a new, unfamiliar sensation. The pain in my bones and muscles didn't disappear, but it seemed to recede into the background, giving way to a surge of some wild, untamed energy. I felt my senses sharpening. The smells of the village, smoke, decay, the fear of the pursuers became sharp, almost tangible. My hearing picked up every rustle, every distant shout, the snap of a twig under someone's foot. My sight. The world around me became clearer, brighter. Even in this gloomy, fog-covered place. My hands covered in stiff, dark fur, clenched into fists, and I felt the newly acquired claws digging into my palms. It was repulsive and exhilarating. "Werewolves," I repeated, but now there was no longer the same horror in my voice, but rather a grim statement of fact. "So this is our only card in this cursed game." Davis nodded, watching me closely. "Maybe. The strength, it comes with the curse. But so does the rage. The main thing is not to lose your head, not to let the beast inside take over completely." He spoke as if he himself had gone through this many times, balancing on the edge. "I've been here for," he faltered. "Well, for me it was a year. I've learned their habits a bit. They are strong in a crowd, but cowardly alone. And they fear what we are becoming more than we do ourselves." He pointed his makeshift spear towards the forest we had come from. The tower. It was the entry point. Maybe it's also the exit. If we can break through to it and hold out until midnight, maybe the curse will lift. It was a faint hope, but it was the only hope we had. I looked at my hands, at the sharp claws. Inside me, man and something else were fighting. The man was terrified, wanted to hide, curl up, and wait for this nightmare to end. But the beast snarled, demanding a fight, demanding survival. And now, with adrenaline and the burgeoning transformation clouding rational thought, the beast was starting to gain the upper hand. "All right," I growled, and the sound of my voice surprised me. It was lower, harsher, with some growling notes. "Lead the way, we'll break through." We got ready. My knife now felt almost like a toy in my hand. but it was all I had besides the claws and teeth which I felt were also lengthening and sharpening. Davis checked the tips fastening on his spear. His movements were slow but steady. He seemed to have accepted his fate, but the sight of my resolve, even if fueled by despair and animalistic rage, ignited some new fire in his eyes. "They're surrounding the village," Davis said, listening. "The main street will be blocked. We need to go through the backyards, through the gardens. There's less security there, but the terrain is more difficult. And try not to make noise until you have to." I nodded. Trying to be quiet when everything inside me was seething with rage and pain was not easy. Every muscle in my body ached. My skin itched and burned, as if being stretched from within. I felt my posture changing, becoming more hunched, ready to spring. "Remember Riley?" Davis said as we were about to slip out of the narrow passage. "They see us as monsters, and perhaps to some extent they are right. But we are not them. We don't kill for pleasure. We fight to survive." His words sobered me slightly. Yes, I was changing, turning into something terrifying. But I was still Jake Riley, and I wasn't going to surrender to these ghosts of the past. We slipped out of the passage, finding ourselves in a weed-choked backyard. In the distance, shouts and the ringing of bells could be heard. Davis gestured, and we, crouching low, ran along a leaning fence, trying to stay in the shadow of the sparse trees and half-ruined sheds. My heart pounded in my chest like a war drum, but now it wasn't just fear. It was rage. The rage of a cornered animal ready to fight back. We crept along the backyards of the village, darting from one cover to another. The smell of smoke from the torches grew stronger, and the cries of the pursuers louder. It was clear they were searching the village house by house. Soon, a tall, half-rotted palisade blocked our way, enclosing what was apparently someone's garden. "Through there," Davis whispered, pointing to a gap in the fence. "Beyond it is a path that should lead us to the edge of the village." We squeezed through the gap, and immediately ran into them. Two villagers, armed with pitchforks, stood with their backs to us, peering into the garden. Hearing the snap of a dry branch under my foot, they spun around. Their eyes widened in terror and rage at the sight of us. "Beasts, there they are!" yelled one of them, raising his pitchfork. There was no time to think. Something clicked inside me. A growl, low and guttural, tore from my chest before I even processed it. I lunged forward, dodging the sharp prongs of the pitchfork. My hand, no longer entirely human, clenched into a fist with claws extended, slammed into the attacker's face. The blow was so powerful I heard the crunch of bone. The man flew back like a rag doll and crumpled to the ground without a sound. The second one, momentarily stunned, roared and lunged at me from the other side. Davis met him with a thrust of his spear to the chest. The tip went deep and the villager gasped, dropping his pitchfork and collapsing to the ground. I looked at my hands, at the dark blood dripping from my claws. Disgust wrestled with some wild, intoxicating feeling of power. I had done it. I had killed, even if it wasn't quite a person, but rather a ghost still. "No time for reflection, Riley," Davis shouted, pulling out his spear. "There'll be more of them here in a minute." We ran along the narrow path winding between the weed-choked rows. The cries behind us grew louder. Our skirmish had been noticed. Hiding was useless now. We had to break through. At the edge of the garden, another group of hunters awaited us, about 5 men, armed with axes and clubs. They rushed at us, roaring. And then I truly felt the effects of the curse. My movements became incredibly fast, agile, almost instinctive. I saw every axe swing, every movement of my opponent, as if time had slowed down. I dodged, struck with my claws, growled, and my growl seemed to instill even greater terror in them. Davis fought beside me, his spear flashing like a snake's tongue. We were like two berserkers, two demons unleashed from hell. I no longer thought I acted on pure instinct, defending my life and Davis's. I bit, I scratched, I struck. The pain from the wound on my ankle almost disappeared, replaced by adrenaline and rage. We managed to break through their ranks, leaving behind groaning and fallen enemies. We ran out of the village and into the forest, heading, as I assumed, towards the tower. Behind us echoed shouts, the barking of dogs or some wolf-like creatures I'd glimpsed among the pursuers, and the constant maddening ringing of bells. The forest around was dark and hostile, but my sharpened senses helped me navigate. I saw in the dark, almost as clearly as in daylight, smelled the pursuers, heard them yards away. We ran blindly, leaping over fallen trees and streams. Suddenly, Davis cried out and fell. I turned around. A short feathered arrow protruded from his shoulder. His face was contorted with pain. "Davis!" I rushed to him. The pursuers were already close, their torches flickering between the trees. "Run, Riley," he croaked, trying to get up. "Leave me, you have to make it." "No way," I roared. The beast in me wanted to abandon the wounded and save myself, but the man, the Marine, couldn't do it. I grabbed him under his good arm, taking some of his weight, and we ran again, slower now, but with the same desperate determination. I glanced back. One of the pursuers, swinging an axe, was only a few steps away. I spun around, letting out a deafening, inhuman howl, full of rage and threat. The pursuer froze for a moment, his eyes wide with superstitious terror. That hesitation was enough for us to gain a few more yards. The path to the tower was still far, and our strength was running out. We burst into a small clearing, and I saw it. The dark, pointed silhouette of the fire lookout tower against the slightly lighter sky. The fog wasn't as thick here, but it still enveloped the top. The tower, our only chance. But the pursuers were almost on our heels. Their shouts and the barking of dogs sounded very close, making my heart clench with terror and despair. "Come on, Davis, just a little further," I croaked, dragging him along. His wounded shoulder was bleeding, his face was pale, but he gritted his teeth and tried to keep up. Each step cost him immense effort. We reached the base of the tower. The metal ladder, stretching up into the darkness, seemed like a path to salvation. But there was no time to rest. The first figures of the hunters were already bursting out of the forest, their torches casting dancing shadows on the steel structure. "Climb, faster!" I yelled at Davis, pushing him towards the ladder. He began to scramble up, wincing in pain, clinging to the cold rungs with one good hand and using his legs to help. I followed him, constantly looking back. "They're here! The beasts are climbing the tower!" A furious cry rang out from below. I looked down. The crowd of villagers had already surrounded the base of the tower. Some of them, the most agile, had already started climbing the ladder after us. There were many of them, and they were determined. The climb was torture. My hands, covered in fur and armed with claws, struggled to grip the narrow metal rungs, designed for human hands in gloves, not animal paws. Davis moved slowly, groaning in pain, but climbed stubbornly upward. I tried to cover him, batting away those who tried to grab our legs. One of them, his face contorted with rage, almost reached Davis's ankle. I twisted around as much as possible on the narrow ladder and kicked him in the face. He plummeted down with a yell, dragging another with him. But there were too many of them. They climbed like ants, their rough hands gripping our legs, our clothes. I growled, bit, fought back, feeling my strength abandoning me. We were about 30 feet from the platform when I felt someone's fingers clamp like a vice onto my injured ankle. Pain shot through me, making me cry out. "Don't give up, Riley," Davis croaked from above. He was almost at the hatch to the observation platform. I writhed, trying to shake off the attacker, but he held on tight. His eyes, full of mad hatred, were only a foot from mine. He raised a rusty knife, and then something exploded inside me. All the horror, all the pain, all the rage of this endless day merged into one deafening, inhuman howl. It was the howl of a cornered animal, a howl of despair and final, desperate hope. The sound was so powerful it seemed the tower itself trembled. The pursuer holding my leg froze for a moment, his eyes wide with primal fear. I used the opportunity, lunged upward, freeing my leg, and climbed the ladder with renewed strength. We were almost at the very top. Davis was already squeezing through the hatch. I scrambled after him, feeling the hot breath of the pursuers burning my back. One of them, a burly fellow with an axe, was already reaching for Davis's leg, who was half hidden in the hatch. It seemed all was lost. And at that very moment, when the axe was already raised for the blow, I heard a quiet but distinct sound. Ding, ding, ding. My old army watch on my wrist, the one I never took off. It struck midnight. June 26th had begun. The instant the watch struck 12, something incredible happened. The figure of the villager with the axe, frozen an inch from Davis's leg, suddenly began to tremble and become transparent. His furious face contorted with an expression of bewilderment, and then he simply dissolved into the air like smoke from a fire. The same thing happened to the other pursuers climbing the ladder. One by one they froze, their outlines blurred, and they vanished, leaving behind nothing but the echo of their dying, surprised gasps. The ominous ringing of bells, which had haunted us this entire nightmare day, abruptly ceased. The fog around the tower began to thin rapidly, revealing the stars twinkling in the night sky. I froze, not believing my eyes, breathing heavily and clinging to the rung. Then I looked at my hands. The dark, stiff fur covering them began to retract, to disappear. The long, sharp claws shortened, turning back into ordinary human fingernails. The itching and burning passed, leaving behind only a dull ache throughout my body. I somehow scrambled onto the observation platform, where Davis already lay, breathing heavily. What was that?" I croaked, looking around. Davis smiled weakly. "Midnight, Riley. The curse. It lifted. Until next year." I rushed to the small, cracked mirror tacked to the cabin wall. My own human face stared back, exhausted, dirty, bruised, and scratched, but mine. No fangs, no yellow eyes, no pointed ears. The relief was so overwhelming that my legs gave out and I sank to the floor. Davis was also slowly recovering. His animal features had disappeared, but the wound on his shoulder remained deep, bleeding. The arrow, luckily, wasn't there. It must have fallen out during the climb or been pulled out by one of the pursuers. We did it," I whispered, still unable to believe it. Suddenly, the radio on the table hissed and came to life. "Crow's Peak, this is base. Eagle's Nest reports strange lights in your sector. Jake, are you on the air? Over." I struggled to my feet, went to the radio. My hands were shaking. What could I tell them? The truth? That we were chased by medieval ghost peasants, and we were turning into werewolves. They'd send me to the asylum immediately. "Base, this is Crow's Peak." My voice sounded hoarse and uncertain. We have an emergency here, an attack. It seems it was some cultists, or just lunatics. Ranger Davis. He's here with me. He's wounded. We need urgent evacuation and medical assistance. Over." There was a short pause, then Henderson's voice full of alarm. "Davis? He's alive? My God. Hold on, boys. I'm sending a helicopter and a team immediately. You can tell us what happened later. Just hold on. Over." I helped Davis move into the cabin, quickly bandaged his wound with a piece of my torn shirt. We sat in silence, listening to the sounds of the normal night forest. The rustle of wind in the treetops, the hoot of an owl. No trace of the village, no sign of the pursuers. Only broken branches at the base of the tower, a few spots of dark blood on the metal structure of the ladder, and our own injured bodies. As if it had all been just a bad dream. But we both knew it was reality. Terrifying, impossible, but real. I looked at Davis. He closed his eyes, an expression of endless exhaustion on his face. "Thank you, Riley," he said softly without opening his eyes. "Thank you for not leaving me." I didn't answer. I just looked at the rising sun, which was painting the sky in soft pink hues, and thought about how I had experienced something beyond human understanding. But I had survived. We both had survived. For now. The rescue helicopter arrived with the first rays of sun. Davis and I were hoisted aboard. Henderson was there, his face grim, but relief was in his eyes when he saw Davis alive. At the hospital, Davis was immediately operated on. My wounds were treated, the deepest cuts stitched, painkillers given. Then came the interrogations. First, local cops, then the park security service. I told them a fabricated story about being attacked by a group of aggressive vagrants or cultists armed with old weapons. I mentioned that they seemed to be under the influence of some drugs. Davis confirmed my version, adding only that he didn't remember much due to shock and blood loss. Of course, they didn't really believe us. Too many inconsistencies. But they had no other, more plausible version either. In the end, they attributed everything to our post-traumatic state and shock. The case was buried to avoid creating panic among tourists. Davis, as soon as he could walk, immediately resigned. He didn't say a word about what happened on Crow's Peak, but his eyes, they remained forever scared, haunted, as if he still saw the shadows in the fog and heard the ringing of the cursed bells. He left Pine Ridge, and I never heard from him again. I hope he found his peace somewhere far from these mountains. I couldn't stay there either. The forest, which had once seemed like a refuge, was now full of hidden threats. Every rustle, every gust of wind, every patch of fog triggered fits of panic in me. I transferred to another national park, on the plains, thousands of miles from the Appalachians. I tried to return to a normal life, convince myself that it had all been just a nightmare, a hallucination caused by isolation and stress. But the scars remained, not just on my body, but on my soul, and the memory of my hands turning into clawed paws, of the animalistic rage boiling in my blood, of the taste of blood on my teeth. A year passed. I was sitting in my small cabin looking at the calendar on the wall. June 24th. That night I had nightmares. Thick fog, the ominous ringing of bells, and a low, guttural growl coming from my own chest. On the morning of June 25th, I woke up with a heavy heart. Walking to the mirror, I stared at my reflection for a long time. And for one terrifying moment, it seemed to me that my fingernails had become slightly longer, slightly sharper, and a yellowish glint flickered in the depths of my pupils. I blinked, and the illusion disappeared. Just a trick of the imagination, I told myself. Just nerves. Then I turned on the television. Morning news. A report from some small town in the Appalachians. The announcer spoke of a strange, unusually thick fog that had suddenly enveloped one of the mountain peaks, and how contact with the new ranger, who had recently taken up his post at the Crow's Peak Fire Lookout, had been lost several hours ago. I turned off the television. The curse. It hadn't gone anywhere. It was just waiting for its next victim. And somewhere out there, in the fog, the hunt was beginning again. Story 2. My name is David, and I've been a park ranger for the last 10 years. I've seen everything from stupid tourists feeding bears to poachers who think they own the forest. But what I was about to face at Hawks Peak Lookout defied all boundaries, all safety instructions. It all started 2 weeks ago. Bob Harris, old Bob, who knew this national park like the back of his hand, stopped checking in. He was stationed at Hawks Peak, one of the most remote fire lookouts, about 20 miles from the nearest paved road. At first, we weren't particularly worried. Communication there was always spotty, especially in bad weather, and Bob was a self-sufficient guy, not one to panic over trifles. But day after day passed, and the radio remained silent. Our daily attempts to call him at 8 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and 18 o'clock were met with a dead hiss of static. My boss, Henderson, furrowed his brow but put it down to equipment failure. Most likely the lightning strike took out the antenna, or the generator died, he said, tapping his pen on the map. Bob's probably just waiting for someone to come up. It's not like him to abandon his post. There was another version which Henderson mentioned reluctantly, that Bob might have snapped and gone AWOL. But I knew Bob. He was old school for him, service was sacred, and where would he go? He had no family left, and the forest was his true home. After 14 days of silence, even Henderson's patience snapped. He called me into his office, a small room cluttered with maps and reports, smelling of coffee and old paper. "David," he said, looking over his glasses, "I don't like the situation with Bob. Go to Hawks Peak. Check the equipment, find out what's up with Harris, and report back. Take a spare radio set and batteries with you." He handed me the standard assignment form. "And be careful. It's wild country up there." I nodded. "Understood, boss. I'll leave in the morning." Packing my gear that evening, I felt a slight chill run down my spine, an inexplicable unease I attributed to fatigue and the general tension of the past few days. My well-worn backpack weighed a good 40 pounds. A sleeping bag, a change of clothes, 3 days' worth of food, tools, a first aid kit, a powerful flashlight, and of course, the spare radio. I checked my old Ford pickup, filled the gas tank. It was a long drive ahead. The thought of Bob wouldn't leave my mind. What could have happened to an experienced ranger in his own element? A bear? Unlikely Bob knew how to handle them. An accident? Possible. But 2 weeks of silence. That was too much. Something was wrong, very wrong. And this premonition, like a splinter under my skin, kept bothering me the whole way there. The last 5 miles to Hawks Peak, my Ford struggled, bouncing over roots and rocks on a narrow, barely visible track. Finally, the road disappeared altogether, ending in thick undergrowth. From there, only on foot, about a mile of steep ascent. I slung my backpack over my shoulders, checked my water flask, and moved up the barely discernible trail winding among ancient pines and firs. The air was fresh, but somehow heavy, oppressive. The higher I climbed, the thicker the fog became. At first it clung to the treetops like a light haze, and then, like a living creature, it crept downwards, enveloping everything in a dense, milky white shroud. By the time I reached the base of the hill where the tower stood, visibility had dropped to about 15 feet, no more. The fog was unnaturally thick, almost palpable, and somehow cold, damp, despite the warm day. It moved, swirled, as if breathing. the smell. I'll never forget that smell. A mixture of damp, disturbed earth, decaying leaves, something musty, like a long-abandoned basement, and a faint but distinct metallic tang like rust or old blood. It penetrated my nostrils, settled on my tongue, making me feel nauseous. I stopped several times trying to catch my breath and shake off the nausea, but the fog only tightened its embrace. Hawks Peak Lookout was a standard wooden structure about 100 feet tall, with a small observation cabin at the top. It was barely visible through the white haze like a ghost. I approached the base of the stairs and immediately noticed something wrong. On the thick wooden steps and railings leading up, there were deep, ragged scratches. Not the kind a bear leaves trying to climb. Those are usually wider and less chaotic. These were narrow, as if from dozens of sharp claws, and they ran somehow furiously, leaving splinters the thickness of a finger. Some boards were cracked. One step at a height of about 20 feet was even broken in half. This was not a grizzly, and not a cougar. The marks were too vicious, as if someone or something in a frenzy was trying to break through or pull someone down from there. My heart beat faster. I pulled my Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum from the holster on my belt. Not that I expected to shoot ghosts, but it felt safer with it. The climb up the creaky steps turned into a trial. Each step echoed loudly in the strange silence, broken only by my own heavy breathing and the dripping condensation from the rotten boards. The fog here, right by the tower, seemed even thicker, and that metallic smell made my throat scratchy. Finally, I reached the hatch leading into the observation cabin. It was ajar. I pushed it open and climbed inside. What I saw made me freeze. Total destruction. The small desk where Bob usually kept his records was overturned. Maps, logbooks, books. Everything was scattered across the floor, some pages torn out and crumpled. The communication equipment, the base radio, and the solar panel were shattered. The radio screen looked like a spiderweb of cracks, wires ripped out. One of the 4 windows of the cabin, facing north, was broken, shards of glass lying on the floor. Bob's cot was overturned. His old sleeping bag lay in the corner, as if something had fiercely shaken it. But the strangest thing, there were no signs of a struggle, not a drop of blood. Just wild, inexplicable fury unleashed on this small sanctuary, and not the slightest hint of Bob himself. His personal belongings, his mug, a photo of his late wife, his old smoking pipe. Everything was in its place, albeit knocked onto the floor. Only he himself was missing. I tried my portable radio. I pressed the push to talk. Base, this is David McCready at Hawks Peak Lookout, over. In response, only deafening static, interspersed with crackling. I switched channels, changed settings, useless. Complete isolation. The fog outside had thickened so much it felt like I was inside a giant cotton ball. And that smell, it was getting stronger. I realized it wasn't just equipment malfunction. Something terrible had happened here. After inspecting the cabin again and finding nothing that could shed light on Bob's disappearance or explain this wild mess, I decided staying here was a bad idea. I needed to go down and get out of this cursed fog as soon as possible to reach a place where I could get reception and report to Henderson. But first, I should at least briefly examine the area at the base of the tower, just in case Bob was nearby, injured or worse. I descended the creaking ladder again, trying not to look at the horrible scratches which now seemed even more ominous. The fog at ground level was just as dense, visibility no more than 10 to 15 feet. It seemed to breathe, the swirling masses slowly shifting, sometimes revealing a small patch of withered grass, then hiding it again. The air was heavy and damp, every drop of condensation from the trees falling with a hollow, unnaturally loud sound. I tried to stay away from the very edge of the fog, if you could call it that, though it was everywhere. Taking a few steps from the base of the tower, I started walking around it. The silence pressed on my ears, broken only by the crunch of branches under my boots and my own breathing, which seemed too loud. And then I heard it. At first, it was a quiet rustle, as if something large was pushing through the bushes somewhere deep in the fog. I froze, listening. The rustle repeated, closer, and then came a low, guttural growl that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. It wasn't the growl of a bear or a cougar. There was something alien about it, primal, full of hatred. It chilled me to the bone, making me instinctively step back. I couldn't see the source of the sound, but I felt its presence. Something huge and malicious was hiding there, in the white shroud. To hell with this, I muttered to myself. I've had enough. I wouldn't find any trace of Bob here, but I'd easily find trouble. I needed to get out, and fast. I turned around and quickly walked towards the barely visible trail I had come up on. I hadn't gone more than 50 yards when I caught movement in the fog to my left. Indistinct, elongated shadows much taller than a human flickered between the trees. They moved fast, silently, like hunters cornering prey. There were several of them. My heart dropped somewhere to my heels. I quickened my pace, almost breaking into a run, but it was too late. Something huge, dark, and incredibly fast burst out of the fog to my right, knocking me down so hard I barely had time to put out my hands. The impact was so strong it knocked the air out of my lungs. I hit the ground hard, hurting my shoulder and head. For a moment, my vision went dark. Before I could get my bearings or make out the attacker, I felt only a putrid hot breath on my face, a mixture of decay and something else, sickeningly sweet, and saw a massive clawed paw, the size of my head, flash in the haze. The claws were about 6 inches long, black and sharp as razors. Panic flooded my consciousness. Without thinking, I rolled to the side, scrambled to my feet, and, without looking back, bolted back to the tower. It was the only cover, the only hope. I heard heavy, ragged breathing and the snapping of branches behind me. It was pursuing me. Adrenaline propelled me forward, my legs carrying me up the slope on their own. The ladder seemed like salvation. I flew up it, skipping steps, ignoring how it swayed and creaked. Once inside the cabin, I slammed the hatch shut behind me and frantically slid the heavy iron bolt, which luckily was intact. My heart was pounding like crazy. I could barely breathe. Outside, at the base of the tower, came that same guttural growl, and then the scraping of claws on wood. It was trying to climb. I heard its heavy, gurgling breathing right below the hatch. Then another and another. There were several of them. They had surrounded the tower. The sun was already setting, and the fog began to take on grayish-purple hues. It was getting dark. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, gripping the now useless pistol in my hands, and listened as these creatures circled below, scratching at the supports, growling softly and sometimes making strange, gurgling sounds. I was trapped. And then, through the static, my radio, lying on the floor, suddenly came to life. First a loud crackle, then a hiss, and then a distorted but agonizingly familiar voice, full of desperation. Is anyone there? Over, David, is that you? I froze. It was Bob's voice. Bob? Bob, is that you? Where are you? What's happening? My voice trembled, words barely escaping. I grabbed the radio like a drowning man clutching a straw. For a few seconds, only static and crackling came in reply, through which a faint, broken voice struggled to be heard. "David, thank God. Listen to me. Not much time, very little time." Bob's voice was exhausted, barely audible, as if he was speaking from a deep well. There was none of his usual cheerfulness, only endless fatigue and fear. "Bob, where are you? I'm at the tower. There's some kind of nightmare here." "No time." His voice broke into a gasp. "The hatch. Close the hatch, lock all the windows if you can. And under no circumstances, under any circumstances, do not open it until dawn. Hear me? Until dawn." And just like that, the connection was lost. The radio hissed with dead static again. I shook it, yelled Bob's name, but only silence answered. What was that? A hallucination? Had my mind, unable to bear the tension, played a trick on me? But the voice, it was Bob's voice. I would know it anywhere, and the terror in it was too real. "First wave." What does that mean? Despite the complete confusion, the instinct for self-preservation took over. Bob's words, however insane they seemed, sounded like a final warning. I checked the bolt on the hatch. It held firm. There were 3 intact windows in the cabin and 1 broken one. I found some old boards left over from some repair and my small hatchet in my backpack. Somehow, with trembling hands, I managed to board up the broken window and reinforce the frames of the others, propping them up with boards. Through the cracks between the boards, I could still see the swirling fog, which had turned almost black with the onset of twilight. Time stretched on agonizingly slowly. I sat in the corner, my back pressed against the wall, gripping the now useless pistol, listening to these creatures circling below, scraping at the supports, growling softly and occasionally making strange, gurgling sounds. I was trapped. And then, through the noise of the static, my radio lying on the floor suddenly came to life. The same crackle, the same hiss, and again a faint, distorted voice of Bob. "David, can you hear me?" His voice sounded even weaker than before, almost a whisper. "Bob, yes, I hear you. Bob, what's happening? These wolves..." "I know. They'll come back, David. And there will be others. Worse. Crawlers." He paused as if gathering strength. They can climb up. You need a weapon, David. A real weapon." "A weapon? My revolver is useless against them. There are too many." "Under the northwest support of the tower." His voice was broken by static. "About 2 feet from it. Dig. It's not deep, about a foot. I managed to hide it. Before I..." His voice trembled. "Bob, what happened to you? Tell me. Can I help you?" I pleaded. There was a long silence, then I heard something like a bitter chuckle. I can't be helped anymore, David. I'm already on the other side. This place, it takes souls. I want to help you while I still can, before they take me completely." The connection cut off again, this time seemingly for good. On the other side. What did he mean? A shiver ran down my spine. But there was no time for contemplation. If Bob was telling the truth about crawlers capable of climbing up, I really needed something more serious than my revolver. Overcoming my fear and a sickening premonition, I unlocked the hatch and cautiously peered outside. The fog was still swirling, but no sounds except the rustling of leaves could be heard. I quickly descended the ladder, trying not to make noise. My heart hammered in my chest like a jackhammer. Northwest support. I found it. The ground here was soft, covered with decayed leaves. I had a small entrenching tool, shovel in my backpack. I started digging. About a foot down, just as Bob said, the shovel hit something hard, wrapped in thick, oiled cloth. I unearthed the bundle. It was heavy. Unwrapping it with trembling hands, I saw an old but sturdy 12-gauge double-barreled shotgun, a Remington, I think, and a cardboard box of shells. I counted them, 20 rounds, 20 shots against, I don't know what. Not many, but better than nothing. I quickly returned to the tower, dragging the shotgun and the precious shells with me. I locked the hatch again. I barricaded myself even more securely than before, using everything I could find in the cabin. I felt that this night would be decisive. Either I would survive and fulfill Bob's promise, or I would join him on the other side. I checked the shotgun, arranged the shells so they were easy to reach. I leaned the spear against the wall next to me. All that was left was to wait, and the fear I felt was no longer just the fear of death. It was a primal terror of something ancient, incomprehensible, and incredibly malicious. The Lord is coming. The darkest night descended on Hawk's Peak. The fog became almost palpable. It seeped through the cracks in the boards, bringing with it a freezing cold and that same sickening smell of decay and old blood, which now seemed to me the smell of death itself. In the wailing of the wind rushing around the tower, I imagined hearing quiet whispers, moans, and some foul, damp laughter. My nerves were stretched to the breaking point. I sat, leaning against the wall, with the double-barreled shotgun on my lap and the spear by my hand. Every beat of my heart echoed in my ears like a funeral bell. The wave began abruptly, without a warning howl, without a gradual buildup of threat. Just at some point, the silence exploded with roaring, shrieking, and scraping. Wolves and crawlers attacked simultaneously, with double the ferocity, as if driven by some invisible force. There were more of them than on previous nights. Many more. They climbed the supports from all sides, their burning eyes and clicking jaws flickering in the darkness. I started shooting back, trying to conserve ammunition, aiming for sure kills. The roar of the shots mixed with the howling of the creatures and the cracking of breaking wood. Smoke quickly filled the small cabin, making the already poor visibility almost zero. Several crawlers fell, but others immediately climbed in their place. The wolves below howled and writhed as if encouraging their brethren. A real battle began. I shot, reloaded, shot again. Gun smoke filled the cabin, its acrid smell mixing with the odor of the fog and decay. 2 more crawlers fell, but they were fast and relentless. One of them reached almost to the window. I saw its sightless face, its clicking jaws just a few feet away. I shot at point-blank range. The creature was thrown back, but it managed to rake its claws across the boards I had nailed over the window. Splinters flew inside. The battle continued, it seemed, for an eternity. I fought them off, trying to aim more accurately, conserving my shells. Several times they came so close I could feel their icy breath through the cracks. One creature almost shoved its clawed paw through the breach, but I managed to unload the second barrel into it. As dawn broke, I had almost no shells left, only 3. The crawlers and wolves disappeared again, dissolving into the morning haze. I was utterly exhausted, my hands and legs trembling from tension, my head pounding. The cabin was filled with smoke. Spent casings lay on the floor. I had endured. But at what cost? And what would the next night bring? I had almost no shells left, and Bob's words about this place taking souls echoed in my head like a death knell. I barely slept that night, nor the entire next day. Every rustle made me jump and reach for the shotgun, which held only 3 rounds. My body ached with fatigue, my head pounded. The fog didn't budge an inch. It still tightly enveloped the tower, turning it into an island in a milky ocean. I tried again and again to call for help on the radio, but in return, only dead static. I was completely alone, cut off from the world, in the heart of this nightmare. Afternoon, as the sun began to sink towards the horizon, painting the treetops barely visible through the fog in crimson hues, the radio crackled back to life. The same static, the same hiss, and again Bob's faint, distorted voice. "David, last night, tonight, the worst. Hurry, almost, no time. Bob, for God's sake, tell me what's happening here. What are these creatures? Why are they attacking?" I yelled into the radio, almost weeping with despair and helplessness. There was a long pause. I thought the connection had broken again. But then Bob's voice returned, quiet, full of unspeakable sorrow. "This tower, Hawk's Peak, it's built on an ancient mound, a cursed place. Ancient people, their rituals, they woke an evil. Long ago, it was sleeping. But the tower, it's like a beacon, disturbing it. An ancient mound." I remembered reading somewhere about local legends of Native Americans, about sacred hills and places of power that white men later desecrated with their constructions. But it had always seemed like just folklore to me. "When it's all over, if you survive, David," his voice trembled, you must burn this tower to the ground, and everything around. On the summit of this hill, doesn't matter that you're a fire ranger. This place shouldn't exist. It feeds on fear and lives. Burn everything, David. Promise me." "I promise, Bob. I swear I'll burn it all," I cried out, tears streaming down my face. "Good." Something akin to relief sounded in his voice. "Go down, to the same place again. Where the weapon was, I left more shells. A few, and something else. A tree near the tower, on the south side, young, straight. Ash, it's a special tree. Make a spear, long, very sharp, about 8 feet. You'll know when to use it. Beware. Tonight, the Lord comes." The Lord? A new word that sent a chill down my spine. "Tell my family, if you can, that I love them." These were Bob's last words. The radio hissed and fell silent forever. I sat there for a long time, holding it in my hands, feeling everything inside me break. Bob was dead. I finally understood that. But his spirit, or something of it, remained here to help me. Devastated, but gripped by some new, desperate resolve, I descended from the tower. The fog seemed even thicker, the air heavier. I dug up the cache under the northwest support again. There, under a layer of earth, lay another small box of shells. 10 rounds and 3 in the gun, 13 in total. Not much against the Lord. Then I went to look for the ash tree Bob had mentioned. And indeed, on the south side of the tower, a little distance away, grew a young, perfectly straight sapling, about the thickness of my arm at the base. Its wood was dense and resilient. My small hatchet and hunting knife were with me. The work took a few hours. I cut down the tree, stripped it of branches, sharpened one end so that it became hard and sharp as a real spearhead. I even lightly singed the tip in a small fire I made from dry branches to give it extra strength. An old Native American method. I ended up with an impressive weapon, about 8 feet long, heavy but well balanced. I returned to the tower, dragging the spear and the precious shells with me. I barricaded myself even more securely than before, using everything I could find in the cabin. I felt that this night would be the deciding one. Either I would survive and fulfill Bob's promise, or I would join him on the other side. I checked the shotgun, arranged the shells so they were easy to reach. I leaned the spear against the wall beside me. All that remained was to wait. And the fear I felt was no longer just the fear of death. It was a primal terror of something ancient, incomprehensible, and incredibly malicious. The Lord is coming. The darkest night fell upon Hawks Peak. The fog became almost palpable. It seeped through the cracks in the boards, bringing with it an icy cold and that same sickening smell of decay and old blood that now seemed to me the smell of death itself. In the wailing of the wind rushing around the tower, I imagined hearing quiet whispers, moans, and some foul, damp laughter. My nerves were stretched to the breaking point. I sat, leaning against the wall with the double-barreled shotgun on my knees and the spear close at hand. Every heartbeat echoed in my ears like a funeral bell. The wave began suddenly. Without a warning howl, without a gradual build-up of threat, just at some point, the silence exploded with roaring, shrieking, and scraping. The wolves and crawlers attacked simultaneously with doubled fury, as if driven by some invisible force. There were more of them than on previous nights, far more. They climbed the supports from all sides, their burning eyes and clicking jaws flickering in the darkness. I started shooting back, trying to conserve ammunition, aiming for sure kills. The roar of the shots mixed with the howling of the creatures and the snapping of breaking wood. Smoke quickly filled the small cabin, making the already poor visibility almost zero. Several crawlers fell, but others immediately climbed in their place. The wolves below raged, leaping and gnashing their teeth, their yellow eyes fixed on me. My ammunition was dwindling at a terrifying rate. 13 shots. It was nothing against such a horde. I managed to hold them off, but I knew it wouldn't be for long. My strength was failing. My hands trembled from exhaustion and tension. One of the crawlers broke through the boards on the boarded-up window and almost shoved its ugly head inside when I put my last charge of buckshot from the right barrel into it. The creature fell with a shriek, but there was a hole in the wall the size of a football. And then, as suddenly as it began, the assault stopped. The wolves and crawlers retreated, dissolving into the fog, leaving behind only silence, broken by my own ragged breathing and the pounding of blood in my temples. But this was not the silence of relief. It was an ominous waiting silence. I reloaded the single remaining shell into the left barrel, and then I saw it. The creatures hadn't just retreated. They had parted, creating a corridor in the fog. And from the depth of this corridor, slowly and majestically, a gruesome procession emerged. Several creatures, resembling deformed, desiccated gargoyles with leathery wings and bony bodies, carried something like a palanquin on their shoulders. The palanquin itself was made of blackened human bones, intertwined with rotten vines and pieces of skin. And upon this throne of bones sat It, the Lord of the Mist. It was a formless, swirling mass of darkness, constantly shifting its shape. Its size was that of a small car. In the very center of this pulsating darkness burned a single eye, enormous, the size of a basketball, with a vertical pupil like a reptile's. It was filled with inhuman malice, ancient wisdom, and all-consuming hatred. It radiated an aura of such ancient and powerful evil that it stole my breath, and my legs turned to jelly. Beside the throne, to the Lord's right hand, stood his champion. A massive, muscular creature, about 9 feet tall, resembling a nightmarish blend of man and wolf. Its body was covered in thick black fur. Powerful paws ended in inch-long claws, and a low, menacing growl erupted from its fanged maw. Its eyes burned with red fire. The Lord of the Mist slowly turned its single eye towards me. I felt an icy spike of terror pierce my brain. It wasn't just a gaze, it was an invasion, an attempt to break my will, to drive me into madness. Then the Lord made a sound. Not a cry, not a growl, but some vibrating low-frequency hum that made the glass in the intact windows tremble. It pointed at me with a long, bony appendage that extended from the swirling darkness. The werewolf champion roared and lunged towards the tower. It moved with incredible speed, its claws sinking into the wooden supports, and it scrambled rapidly upward, directly towards the breach in the wall. I had one shell left. I raised the shotgun, aiming at the huge figure of the werewolf. I fired. The blast of buckshot hit its chest, making it stumble for a moment and let out a furious howl. But it didn't fall. It slowed for just a second, then climbed upward with renewed force. It was already at the very edge of the breach. There were no more shells. The shotgun became a useless piece of metal. The werewolf was already shoving its fanged snout through the hole, its red eyes burning with triumph. And then I remembered the spear. Grabbing it with both hands, I felt its weight, the smoothness of the polished wood. There was no time to think. The werewolf had almost climbed inside. But at that moment, instead of trying to stab it, I did what some inner voice, perhaps Bob's voice, told me. Gathering all my remaining strength, all my rage and despair, I turned to face the Lord of the Mist, which still gazed at me motionlessly with its single eye, and with a shout, I hurled the spear. It flew, spinning like an arrow shot from a giant bow. I aimed directly for that horrible, all-seeing eye. A deafening, inhuman shriek erupted, tearing at the heavens. The spear, my last chance, struck its target perfectly. It buried itself deep in the center of the giant eye. For a moment, everything froze. And then, the Lord of the Mist exploded. Not with fire, but with a flash of blinding black energy that erupted from it with a roar, tearing its formless body into a myriad of pieces of darkness. The blast wave hit the tower with such force that I was thrown against the opposite wall. I hit my head hard and lost consciousness. I woke up to silence. A deafening, absolute silence that descended after the infernal roar and howling. My head was pounding, my vision swam. I lay on the cabin floor among debris and splinters. The first thing I saw, managing to focus my sight with difficulty, was the faint gray light filtering through the holes in the walls and the broken windows. Dawn. I struggled to my feet, leaning against the wall. My body was one massive bruise. Every muscle ached. I went to the nearest breach. The fog was gone. It had vanished, dissolved without a trace, as if it had never existed. Around the tower stretched the ordinary morning forest, bathed in the first rays of the sun. No sign of wolves, crawlers, the werewolf, or the Lord. Only deep scratches on the tower supports and broken trees below were reminders of the night's nightmare. And also, the remains of my spear, charred and broken, lay at the base of the hill where the Lord had exploded. I remembered the promise I had made to Bob. Burn this tower. This place shouldn't exist. Descending the stairs, I felt drained, but at the same time, a strange, grim satisfaction was growing inside me. I found a jerry can with leftover generator fuel, which Bob had apparently kept downstairs in a small tool shed. I doused the wooden supports of the tower, the cabin walls, everything that could burn. Then I stepped back a few paces and struck a match. The flames caught instantly, greedily devouring the old, creosoted wood. The dry boards ignited like gunpowder. The fire roared upward, engulfing the entire structure. Black smoke billowed towards the clear morning sky. I watched as the symbol of my horror and the curse of that ancient mound was consumed by cleansing fire. The flames spread to the dry grass and bushes around, and soon the entire summit of the hill was ablaze. It was the biggest and most righteous bonfire of my life. I retreated to a safe distance, to the edge of the forest where the trail downwards began. My portable radio, which I had thought hopelessly dead, suddenly crackled and came to life. "David McCready, respond to base. Hawks Peak Lookout, over. We have a signal from your emergency beacon." The emergency beacon had activated when the Lord exploded. I had forgotten about it. I pressed the push to talk. My voice was hoarse and tired. "Base, this is David McCready. There's a large forest fire at Hawks Peak Lookout. The tower is completely destroyed by fire. Repeat, the tower is destroyed. Bob Harris? I didn't find Bob Harris. I didn't tell them the truth. Who would have believed me? They would have locked me up in a mental institution for the rest of my days. Let them think the fire was an accident or even my negligence. I didn't care. I knew I would face an investigation, perhaps even termination. But I regretted nothing. I looked at the huge column of smoke rising towards the sky and felt that I had fulfilled my duty. I had avenged Bob and perhaps laid to rest not only his soul, but also the ancient evil that had slumbered under that mound. When the helicopter with rescuers and firefighters arrived a few hours later, I was already descending the trail, carrying with me only my backpack and memories that would forever change my life. I walked away, leaving behind the cleansing fire and the secret of Hawks Peak Lookout, which had burned to the ground, taking its nightmares with it. They never built another fire lookout tower on Hawks Peak. The place remained abandoned, a scorched spot on the national park map. And that's how it should be. Some places are best left alone, forever.